So 2 weeks after the Australian Grand Prix, where a minor miracle occurred,
Lord, it's a miracle!
and someone other than Max Verstappen won a race, it was time to get back to some F1, with round 4 heading out into Asia and the Japanese Grand Prix, a race that in 1976 saw a famous title decider between Niki Lauda and James Hunt. In 1989 and 1990 had championship-defining incidents with Senna and Prost, and in 2023 had Sergio Perez deliver his finest disaster class to date. But what will 2024 deliver? Well, let's find out as we get into my ultimate review of Formula 1 and the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix. So what had been going on between Australia and Japan? Well, over at Sauber, news was circulating that they were looking at driver options for 2024, with Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu both on the hot seat. Yes, because that team's performance is clearly all down to the drivers, and not having a bright green tractor of a car, or being unable to tighten a wheel nut. Talking of replacing drivers and now moving to a team that makes it its favourite hobby, Red Bull, who have brought some upgrades along to Japan, clearly in an effort to close the gap at the top, with this Ferrari dominance running wild. In less technical but equally interesting news, Alex Albon's grandma had bumped into Lando Norris while at the airport, with Alex joking that Lando was now her new favourite driver. Rumour has it though the real reason for the meeting was so that she could use her sweet old lady charm to ask Lando to give Alex his chassis. Sticking with that theme of the Williams chassis, and in practice Logan Sargent was looking forward to getting his back. Yeah, so about that. As it turned out, as a thank you for giving Alex his intact chassis in Australia, in Japan Logan instead got the previously broken and now repaired one back from Alex.
Is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed.
But still, with no spare once again, you'd assume that Logan would take great care of the one that he did have, treat his car like Gollum does the One Ring. As it turned out, it took the American all of 30 minutes in the first practice session to run wide out of the S's, go spinning off into the gravel and smash into the barrier.
Oh fuck, I can't believe you've done this.
Plus all this damage meant he'd have to sit out FP2, which as it turned out, so did pretty much everyone else, as the Japanese weather had decided to take centre stage, with the conditions too cold, dull and miserable for much action. Cold, dull and miserable. Sounds like a Lawrence Stroll speech. That of course left just the final practice session for drivers to get their eye in, with both Red Bull drivers complaining of issues with their car and then topping the session with a 1-2. Over at RB, and Daniel Ricciardo was using the final practice session to get on top of his car, and also get on top of the grass at turn 2 as he went and lost control and went spinning off. The TV director then immediately cutting to Liam Lawson in the garage for added comedic effect. And then last but surprisingly not least this year, Haas, with Kevin Magnussen having an incident at the hairpin and going off into the gravel. Unfortunately for the Dane, there was no Sergio Perez diving up his inside to blame this year. Moving on to qualifying, and once the drivers had finished their impression of the M25 leaving the pit lane, we got going, with the pretty straightforward stuff in Q1, aka Logan Sargent being eliminated, joined by Lance Stroll who, after out-qualifying Alonso last time in Australia, had decided to return to normal. Now I'm not saying I'm some kind of predictions god here, but I did kind of call it in my predictions video. Next up then, we have my qualifying fail, and we're going from someone who had a great qualifying last time to a not so good one this time. It's Lance Stroll.
Sometimes my genius it's almost frightening.
Over at Alpine, and Esteban Ocon had made it out of Q1, celebrating by acting like he'd won the lottery. Yeah! Woo! Into Q2, and it was Leclerc and Ferrari playing a risky game, sitting in P9 and electing not to go out again, though as it turned out, as Q3 would show us, it's not like he could improve much anyway. Getting into Q3 though, and it started well for Mercedes, with Lewis Hamilton leading an initial 1-2, until all 8 other cars came out and they ended up all the way down in 7th and 9th.
Great success.
At the top, and it seems Sergio Perez had returned from his year off, as he got 600ths away from Verstappen but wasn't quite able to take pole away. He did make it a Red Bull front row though, ahead of both Norris and the Spanish. Onto the start, and it was all pretty clean, for just one corner, as down the order entering the S's, Daniel Ricciardo had got involved in an incident, and the other car, Alex Albon. Albon going to the outside, squeezed onto the grass, and well, you can see the result wasn't too great for either of them. Onto the restart then, and Nico Hülkenberg completely forgot how to start a race, falling from 10th place down to last in the space of maybe 50 metres. Glad to see things are back to normal at Haas. Fast forward a few laps and it was pit stop time, started off by the McLarens, with Lando coming in and managing to get the undercut on Sergio Perez, which promoted him into a net P2 for about 5 laps when Checo then got by. At Mercedes, and things seem to be going the way of their season so far, with first off, the drivers swapped around to have Russell ahead of Hamilton, Lewis just pretty much giving up at this point. But that driver swap did nothing much for the team's predicament, as seemingly every car under the sun was making their way past Hamilton and then Russell. To be fair to the Mercedes, they were on the one-stop strategy, an option so bad that they were taking a leaf out of the Ferrari strategies of years gone by. Over at Sauber, and they were back to their typically long pit stops, though this time it was understandable given Joe was retiring with gearbox issues. And although Joe was out of it, it didn't stop the rest of the back half of the grid, causing some chaos, in the form of seemingly every single one of them coming into the pits at the same time, and then of course every single one leaving at the same time. This group including Lance Stroll, while his teammate Alonso was up in 5th. Back up at the front, and like the Mercedes, Charles Leclerc was one-stopping. Unlike the Mercedes, he was doing a good job, managing to hold up Sergio Perez, who was unable to get by the Ferrari, until Leclerc ran wide, on the exit of the second Degner, and managing not to run into the gravel, but easily losing the place to Sergio. In behind those two, and it was the 2-stop strategy versus the 1, with Lando Norris lining up a move on George Russell, getting the DRS on the main straight and electing to go round the outside at turn 1. So with all the stops now complete, the running order was as follows: Verstappen and Perez driving off into the distance, Norris the filling in a Ferrari sandwich, Alonso, Piastri and then the tractors, with Tsunoda top 10. And the thing that would really spice this all up, a safety car. Oh hello there Logan Sargent in the gravel. Except unfortunately for the rest of us, he was able to reverse out and no safety car were needed. Williams just full of relief it wasn't another car in the barrier. So ultimately we were left to regular action, most notably Carlos Sainz charging towards Norris and Leclerc, with Lando falling victim to the main straight DRS, leaving Sainz in 4th, chasing Charles for the podium. And just 2 laps later, it was time for the move. Carlos taking the outside into turn 1, meaning he turned 5th into 4th and then 4th into 3rd. Someone else deciding to show up late was Lance Stroll, as towards the end he made some nice moves through the S's, which promoted him all the way up to P11. But hey, I guess we got to give him credit where it's due, even if he was on fresh soft tyres versus old hards. And so with just 3 laps left, there was one last battle to go. George Russell catching Oscar Piastri, trying the move into the chicane but not quite being able to get it done, with Piastri forced to cut the corner. And with just 1 lap to go, all Piastri had to do was drive normally to retain 7th place. Instead, he locked up into the chicane, allowing George a run towards turn 1 and subsequently P7. But up at the front, it was Verstappen comfortably, by 13 seconds, back to his winning ways. Anyways, that's all for now. I hope you have enjoyed. If you have, make sure to give the video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more F1 content. But until next time, take care.